The way things are from a couple of years on, things are real horrible here in New York, all over.
You're dealing with a lot of people that are maniacs today.
You're dealing with an individual who's very basic, who only knows two things, rip off or be ripped off.
Many of those who make good by being bad are nowhere to be seen these days.
I'd be afraid. Of course I'd be afraid. He's a sick guy. He'd kill anytime.
There isn't anything on earth that I will hide from or back up from.
People seem not to understand the close relationship between organized crime and street crime. And certainly in dealing with street crime in his area or any other kind of crime, the uniformed patrolman.
So all the lawyers that worked so hard in this case were on trial for 9 months. We're 3 weeks from an acquittal, all 10 defendants, and the government abandoned the case.
Presenzano, shot 4 times, his throat cut. Presenzano was allegedly connected.
The summer of 1977, New York City. The son of Sam, David Berkowitz, is on the loose and terrorizing the streets of New York City. Various news outlets would hit the streets during this time in order to interview members of the public and capture the general mood of those in fear of the strange homicidal maniac targeting vulnerable citizens of New York City. It would be in the summer of 77 that one news outlet would enter the streets of Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, right after the July 31st, 1977 Son of Sam shooting of 20-year-old Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante, which occurred on Shore Parkway and Bay 14th in the Bath Beach section of Brooklyn. During the news agency's filming, a group of youths would gather around and tell the news exactly how they felt about the dangers of Son of Sam. One 18-year-old individual, wearing a white tank top and a gold cross necklace, would give his input on the matter.
Of course I'd be afraid. He's a sick guy. He'd kill anytime.
Yeah, but we're so mad about how many times he's done that. We're so mad that fed up that I would attack him if he missed. I would attack him.
Let me ask you, why are you...
See, if I'm hanging out, I'm with a lot of people, and he ain't gonna come. Not if there's a lot of people. But they gotta get him, and I know the people from this neighborhood, if they...
News didn't know it at the time, but the young man being interviewed would someday turn into a killer of his own. As part of the infamous Tommy Karate Patera crew, which operated under the umbrella of the Bonanno crime family. In June of 1990, federal authorities would indict over 20 individuals who they deemed as part of the Patera crew. The crew was suspected of running a massive drug enterprise and responsible for numerous homicides. Investigators would state that they suspected the leader of the crew, Tommy Karate Patera, had a death count as high as 30. Some of the prominent names indicted included Thomas Patera, Vincent Kojak Giattino, Richard David, Frankie Jupiter Martini, future cooperating witness Frank Ganji, and the man featured in the Son of Sam news footage, William Billy Bright, a man who would become a major marijuana trafficker within Tommy Karate's crew, and a man involved in some of the murderous activities of the crew. In 1985, 8 years after he appeared in the news footage, he, along with his childhood friend Frank Ganji, would be involved in the death of one Arthur Governaro at a Gravesend stash house. The duo would take out Governaro after accusing him of stealing from their drug operation. He would run off wounded and speak his dying words to police, telling them that Billy Bright and Frank Ganji did this to him. They would go to trial for the incident, but would escape murder charges, only serving a year for weapons offenses. Upon release, Billy Bright would fall deeper into criminal activity. Future federal cooperating witness and Patera crew member Frank Ganji would claim that Billy Bright would be present for the 1987 death of Talal Siksik, inside an apartment at 2807 Kings Highway. Ganji would say that Tommy Patera would enter the apartment and find Billy Bright and Shlomo Sammy Mendelson in possession of a handcuffed and taped Talal Siksik. Patera would end the life of Siksik and take him apart in a bathtub. His remains interred in a Staten Island marsh. On March 5, 1989, Patera crew associate Richard Leone and his friend Solomon Stern would suffer a horrible death at the hands of the Patera crew inside Tommy Patera's club. Those involved included Tommy Patera, Richard David, and Billy Bright. Both individuals would be taken apart and buried in a Staten Island marsh. Frank Gangi would say that Billy Bright would come to his house the next morning, covered in dirt and looking distraught. He would tell Gangi of the previous night's ritual, which could only be described as sadistic torture. In June of 1990, the indictment would come down, and the men at the head of the crew, Banana Made Man Thomas Tommy Karate Patera, and others would be apprehended. Billy Bright, along with Vincent Kojak Giattino, would go on the lam in order to escape authorities. Both would end up in America's Most Wanted. Kojak would be tracked down in Florida and apprehended on July 29, 1991. Billy Bright would be apprehended in Las Vegas on September 11, 1990. In the end, Billy Bright would plead guilty to drug conspiracy, racketeering, and his role in the 1989 deaths of Solomon Stern and Richard Leone. Billy Bright would receive a 17-year prison sentence and be shipped off to a federal penitentiary in Atlanta. However, Billy Bright wouldn't last long enough to fulfill his prison obligations. On the 24th of May, 1994, Billy Bright was in the exercise yard at USP Atlanta. He would be hit from behind by a group of individuals and shanked 7 times. He would die right there on the grounds of the prison, a prison he was sent to because of a similar fate he helped dish out on the streets of Brooklyn. Today, Billy's death is thought to have been planned by drug trafficker and John Gotti associate Mark Ryder, with help from the Aryan Brotherhood. The death was supposedly due to Ryder's belief that Billy Bright, along with Tommy Patera, were involved in the death of his son Greg Ryder. Frank Gangi once described Billy Bright as becoming very religious after his release from his 1-year sentence in the mid-'80s. Upon his death, news outlets would further refer to Billy as a devout religious man, with an elaborate tattoo of Jesus Christ on his back. Unfortunately for Billy Bright, God didn't have his back on May 24, 1994, when death came knocking. What could have become of the young 18-year-old who spoke to the news in 1977 about the ongoing threat of Son of Sam? We will never know. What were the full extent of his crimes? We may also never know. However, we do know how it all ended. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this short story. Please like, subscribe, and tell anyone you know who you think will be interested in content such as this to head on over to NYC Crime Spot.
The way things are from a couple of years on, things are real horrible here in New York, all over.
You're dealing with a lot of people that are maniacs today.
You're dealing with an individual who's very basic, who only knows 2 things, rip off or be ripped off.
Many of those who make good by being bad are nowhere to be seen these days.
I'd be afraid. Of course I'd be afraid. He's a sick guy. He'd kill anytime.
There isn't anything on earth that I will hide from or back up from.
People seem not to understand the close relationship between organized crime and street crime. And certainly in dealing with street crime in his area or any other kind of crime, the uniformed patrolman.
So all the lawyers that worked so hard in this case were on trial for 9 months, with 3 weeks from an acquittal, all 10 defendants, and the government abandoned the case.
Provenzano, shot 4 times, his throat cut. Provenzano was allegedly connected.